Keep in mind some of the key points from this summary as you listen to tonight's speakers. First, nationally, the economic expansion continues and seems to face no immediate threat, although uncertainty of federal policy could put that outlook at risk. Second, Oregon's economy continues to grow with job gains that keep pace with our growing population. The rate of growth has slowed, which is expected in the later stages of a recovery. 3, Oregon's general fund revenues have exceeded the forecast by more than 2%, which means the kicker will come into play this year. This means a reduction in general fund tax collections for 2018 as taxpayers deduct their rebate, as does a weaker outlook for corporate profits mean a reduction in general fund tax collections. But these reductions appear to be offset by greater lottery revenue and legislative changes made in 2017. Fourth and final, compared to other states, Oregon's revenue growth is healthy, even as the expansion slows. However, looking forward over the next 10 years, revenues will face downward pressure as baby boomers work and spend less, lowering state income tax revenue.
There's not going to be one silver bullet that's going to get us into a healthy, wealthy future. The way to balance our budgets going forward depends not only on taxes per se, but also the expenditures that we're making and the needs that we have as a state, right? So one of the reasons that we're seeing a lot of stresses on our state budget is because of the rising cost of health care. So if we as a state can continue the work that we've been doing in reforming our healthcare delivery, getting more people, getting access for more people, using our CCO model, which is a great way to contain costs while extending quality care, that kind of work to bring down the cost, to make healthcare more efficient. You know, one of the things that the economic forecast looked at is the rising number of seniors, which are going to increase our costs, and that Oregon has the highest rate of assisted living and residential care communities that accept Medicaid, and the highest percentage of Medicaid finance residents in the nation. And so what that means is we're going to continue to see our Oregon Health Plan costs going up. And so this is something that we really have to plan for and adjust for.
The business community is a full partner in this effort. Nothing is more important to the economy of the state of Oregon than the long-term fiscal health of the state. Without a long-term solution to the budget, we will never be able to achieve our collective goals for education, health, and our communities. We recognize that the solution to the problem will involve both spending reforms and tax increases on businesses. And the business community has invested heavily in time and analysis to support legislators' efforts to develop a long-term budget solution. This last session, the state faced about a $1.5 billion deficit to fund current services. So that means to do exactly what it was doing the biennium before, and to meet all the obligations that it had, that we were $1.5 billion short. Looking forward, we face a similar deficit, maybe a little bit larger even, closer to $2 billion in each of the next couple of biennium moving forward, despite the fact that we have had really record-breaking revenue growth over the last several biennium. And so what's driving this? Well, there are a few things that are most significant. The first, as you heard Senator Dembrow talk about, is Medicaid. And we expanded Medicaid in Oregon under the Affordable Care Act and the innovative CCO model that Senator Dembrow spoke about and supported, that we supported. And that expanded coverage to about 400,000 Oregonians. But as part of that, that was always part of the Affordable Care Act, the expansion population was initially paid for by the federal government fully. But that, as always as part of the law, was going to ramp down to 90%. That first ramp down happened this legislative session that we're in, where it went down to 95% for those 400,000 people, and it's going to go down to 90. Now that was address this legislative session primarily by increases in taxes on hospitals and insurance premiums.
The session that just ended was successful in many ways. We were able to deal with a number of tough issues that have been lingering for a number of years, and we passed a very large transportation bill. And of course, we balanced our budget, right? Which is and was no mean feat this session. It involved passing a provider assessment on healthcare providers, hospitals, insurers that allowed us to balance our budget. We were facing about close to $1 billion shortfall in our health services budgets, and that assessment largely covered that and allowed us to keep those programs intact. As you know, that's under challenge now. We're going to be voting on that question in January. That too passed in a bipartisan manner with broad support from industry, and I'm really hoping that we can stick with that.
So moving forward, it's a different issue that is going to become the most menacing problem that faces the budget, and that is the public employee retirement system, PERS. So unlike Medicaid, where we have a history of addressing shortfalls through provider taxes every few years, we don't have any dedicated revenue sources to pay for Oregon's $24.5 billion PERS unfunded liability. We currently pay for that liability through a payroll charge on all public employers. Historically, those public employers, so school districts, state agencies, cities, counties, have paid PERS rates equal to about 12% of their salary costs. So that means on top of whatever they're paying in salary, they'd pay an additional 12% into the PERS fund to cover the pension costs. Today, those costs exceed 20%, and they are marching quickly to exceed 30%. This, of course, does not include the 6% that our public employers also pay for Social Security, and many public employers pay an additional 6% that they pick up on behalf of the employee. So in real terms, here's what these increases look like. This biennium, public employers across the state are paying $1 billion more than they were last biennium for PERS. Next biennium, and that's going to continue moving forward. That cost isn't going to go away. Next biennium, they're going to pay another $1 billion on top of that. And the next biennium, another $1 billion. And by about 2025, public employers will be paying about $4 billion more for PERS than they did in the 2015-17 biennium, the one we just finished. Now, the recent court decision on PERS limited what can be done about the issue as it relates to those who are already retired and to benefits that have already been earned. However, the court was equally clear about what can be done. Benefits yet to be earned can be modified, and employees can be asked to contribute a portion of their salary to share alongside public employers and taxpayers in meeting the challenge of these increasing costs. So I have a slide up here. This shows the public employee contributions to defined benefit pension plans across the U.S. And what you see in that little red bar there is Oregon. So we are an outlier in that we do not require contributions from employees to the defined benefit pension plan, the one that's the PERS fund that has the deficit. Most states do. The average, about 28% of the contributions that are made to the system are made by employees, the rest by employers. Here, it's all made by employers. Most states, as you can see, all the blue states have increased the employee contribution to their pension system since 2009, as other states have also faced increasing cost. Oregon, you can see, is one of the few states that hasn't. While 70% of the liability for PERS is due to retirees, which can't be reformed, 30% of it is due to current workers. Well, 30% of a $24.5 billion liability is a lot of money. That's $7 billion. Now, going forward, employee cost sharing for PERS is going to need to be an important part of this conversation.
I think there are some common sense PERS reforms that can happen that a lot of people would agree to. And I think that the group that the governor has convened, I'm optimistic that they can capture some of the low-hanging fruit.
Now, another issue that doesn't get as much attention, but is also a very large impact on the budget, is the cost of public employee health care. So Oregon's costs for state employee health plans are about 50% higher than state employees in other states. The average cost to insure a state employee through the Public Employee Benefit Board, PEB, is over $17,000 per year in Oregon, compared to about $13,000 for neighboring states and for large private employers in Oregon. Right now, one of the reasons why the costs are so high in PEB is that state employees contribute only 1 to 5% of the premium.
Our goal is to be able to have the increase in the cost of the employees' health plans the same as it's been for the CCOs, which, I don't know if you know this, the costs have been kept down to 3.5% increases, which is pretty remarkable. And really, as I said, we were able to balance our budget in the end because of not only the provider assessment, but also, as Barbara mentioned in the report from DAS, the economic report, our economy is doing well, and our revenues came in higher than expected. So a lot of good news this session, but of course there were disappointments. And probably the biggest one for many of us was our inability, yet again, to pass tax reform, any significant tax reform in the state. Measure 97, which proposed a commercial activities tax, it failed for a number of reasons. But as the legislature started working on the commercial activities tax, which was in many ways similar to what was proposed in 97, the more attractive it became. By the end of the session, there was a real sense that, boy, we have to move beyond that corporate income tax. We have to change models, and that it was something that was going to be much more stable, much less prone to the vagaries of the economy, and one that would be much more difficult to game. But I'll just say, at the end of the day, we couldn't get there, and it remains yet again unfinished business for us. There's talk about collecting signatures to put some form of the commercial activities tax on the ballot. I hope that we can address it in the legislature. You really can't do anything that's covering multiple issues like that through the ballot. It really needs to be addressed in the legislature. And that's why.
While taxes need to be a part of the solution, low tax revenue in and of itself is not the cause of the problem. Oregon has one of the strongest runs of revenue growth among any state in the nation. Our general fund is up 40% over the last 6 years. We haven't had a run like this since the 1990s. We have increased our state investment in K-12 education by $2.5 billion since 2011-13. Now, we can and should have healthy debates about the appropriate level of business taxation, but the reality is that while Oregon's revenue mix might be different than other states, our overall revenue levels are not low by any measure. If the focus is on making changes to the existing tax system, the existing tax code for businesses, and it's done alongside reforms to PERS and public employee health insurance, I think that's something that can be done immediately. Now, if we're going to move to a new type of tax, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to get it right. And I won't get into all those complexities, but one of the key issues is figuring out how to get it right for all different types of business entities. For example, the proposal that was put forward in the legislature would create a gross receipts tax on business and get rid of the corporate income tax. Well, the corporate income tax is only paid by the C corporations. All of those other companies, LLCs, partnerships, S corporations, they pay their business taxes through their personal income taxes. So you had a situation where the largest companies, the C corporations, were going to get a swap. They were going to get rid of the corporate tax, and they were going to get rid of the corporate income tax, but have this new tax. But these other companies were going to have the new tax, but not get rid of the tax that they were paying. And so on an individual company basis, we actually have some companies, and it's mostly the larger more profitable global companies that support moving to a commercial activities tax in some way. And for some of them, it's a benefit, and for some, it's, the change isn't significant enough to. Where we really see the pushback is with what I mentioned, the S corporations, partnerships, LLCs.
With respect to the S corporations, there's a sense that also is part of the problem, is that, one of the reasons that 20 years ago, 18% of Oregon revenues came from corporations, and now it's down to 6%, is that a number of corporations restructured themselves as S corporations in order to pay a lower rate and avoid those corporate taxes. And so as we try to solve this, yes, certainly there's going to be some concern there, and we need to come up with something that, certainly doesn't over penalize them. We have ahead of us in the 2018 session, a short session where the sessions in the odd-numbered years are 5 months long. In the short session, in the even-numbered years, they're 5 weeks long. And it's everything is much more concentrated, much more focused. It's very difficult to pass complex legislation that's very controversial in a short session.
Finally, I want to talk about reserve funds. Oregon has 2 reserve funds, the Rainy Day Fund and the Education Stability Fund. These funds can only be tapped during recessions. To be able to weather a moderate recession, we believe that those funds should be equal to about 10 to 15% of the general fund. At the end of this biennium, 2017-19, they will be at about 7.5% of the general fund. It's good, better than we've had before, but not good enough to weather a moderate to large recession. So we're going to give out kicker checks. We gave out kicker checks a couple of years ago. And if we had instead put those kicker checks into the reserve funds, we would have an adequately funded reserve right now, and we'd be able to weather the recession. So
what I think we can do in the short session, and I hope we do, I'll certainly be pushing for it, is finally refer the individual kicker to the voters for a vote to repeal the individual kicker. The legislature can't solve this problem on its own because the kicker is locked into the Oregon Constitution. And so all we can do is vote to refer a constitutional amendment to the voters. We did that once before with the corporate kicker. And the corporate kicker goes to education. I believe that if we do repeal the individual kicker, it too is going to need to be tied to education. I feel like a lot of the things that we're talking about, we have been talking about for many, many years. I do believe there's not going to be one silver bullet here to solve these budget problems. It's all of these things that we've mentioned, but it's the commitment to coming together and getting it done, and not allow this just to become a political football that's going to make the difference.
And how we deal with this is probably the most important thing. Do it with revenue and expenses together. Do it in the legislature, not in the ballot. And hopefully we can get a bipartisan committee started now so that we're ready for anything opportunity that exists in 2018 or in 2019, and that we don't allow ourselves to fall into the trap of allowing for divisive ballot measures or going into legislative sessions unprepared.